Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also Ranking Member. Thank you, panel, for being here today. And I'm going to try to have the simple man approach here. Yesterday was the Army birthday, 236 years for the United States Army, a little gang that I spent a few days with in my life, 22 years to be a matter of fact. In that time of 22 years, I was a paratrooper and I was also an artilleryman. And one of the things that we had in our military was that if something were to come down from the institution of the airborne school or the artillery school, a new regulation, a new piece of doctrine, what have you, before it was implemented, they would send it out into the field, as we would call it, to make sure that the people who would have to implement this new regulation, new doctrine, new piece of equipment, what was their assessment of it? I mean, would this be something that would work? Now, my question is simple. Is that the type of process that we have here with regulation, whereby we send these things out to the field to get a bottom-up assessment before we implement it?
The whole notion of the SBREFA review panels was so that we could have a conversation with a regulatory agency before pen was put to paper. The concern was that there would be some pride of authorship once we went to a preliminary rule stage or a proposal of a rulemaking. And I think that that is similar to what you're suggesting here.
But are we doing that?
We're doing it,
yes or no?
We're doing it at OSHA and EPA because it's required of them.
Would the gentleman yield?
I certainly will. You're the ranking member.
Yes.
I follow chain of command.
I'm glad to hear that.
I take orders well, ma'am.
Yes, there is communication once a regulation is going to be an agency. It's known as notice and comment, isn't it? Thank you. Thank you for yielding.
Thank you. So this is once this regulation is identified, or is it going to be implemented?
There's different ways. There could be an advance notice of proposed rulemaking, which occurs in very large undertakings. It could just be a notice of proposed rulemaking. For people that are in, law firms, accounting firms, et cetera, they have the resources to see these things coming. Your average small business, they don't have the resources to see these things coming. They might belong to a trade association that does, et cetera. I mean, the gentleman on the other side of the aisle, the suggestion of some distinction between rural-based businesses and urban-based businesses is a good one in that regard, because somebody that is out there in a rural community is not going to have, unless they have access to the internet, et cetera, they're not going to have access to necessarily a library where they can go look at the Federal Register and see what's being contemplated.
Well, and I think that the gentleman brought up a good point. I mean, is there an evaluative criteria that is out there? Because not all things are alike or equal. I mean, a rural community is different from an urban community. Or, you do have these trade associations. Or what are some of the economic impacts? So, I mean, do we have these type of things out there that preclude this preponderance of, top-down driven edicts and mandates to come down on small business? The next thing to know, once it hits, there's nothing they could do. And I think it comes back to this, predictability and certainty thing that you talked about.
If I may address that, the distinction, I think, is very important between what a SBREFA panel does and the later time when a rule is proposed. The distinction, and I had it in my testimony, is by that time positions have hardened. The value of a SBREFA panel is that the small entity representatives are selected from all of the diverse areas that would be affected, rural, urban, of any kind that a kind of effect that would be felt. And the whole point of it is to bring those people in early to explain what the impacts would be on them. The agency is required, and this bill would strengthen the requirement that the rule alternatives be laid out. And the whole point of this is not to evade the rule or prevent a rule from becoming effective, but to find ways to tailor it so that the impacts on small business could be less. And It by no means is always the case that the only answer is don't do the rule or don't let it apply to small business.
So my final question, because I just had a small business forum back in my district last week, where's the breakdown? Because the small businesses are hurting. So somewhere there's a breakdown, and I think that's what we have to identify. We have all of these systems and panels and organizations and things in place. There's a breakdown somewhere. And the people that are being affected are the economic engine that will drive a turnaround in this country, and those are those small business owners.
I couldn't agree more. My point, I guess, would be that there are only 3 agencies currently subject to the SBREFA panel process, so the others never get the benefit of that early input from those small entities.
Thank you. Now yield back.